Leadership is both verbal and nonverbal. It's not always about what you say that impacts your influence, but it's how you live. It's not about the title of who you are as a pastor, as an author, as a national communicator. That really doesn't necessarily mean that you're leveraging your leadership and your influence. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Chasing Elephants. I am Jeff Wallace. You know now Ryan McDermott. He's been with us for a couple of episodes now. And so we've had some great conversations.
I think so.
It's been really, really good.
It has.
Feedback's been good.
Yeah, man. And a couple episodes ago, you asked me some kind of on-the-spot questions.
I did.
I know this audience already knows you.
Yeah.
But I thought, I've got some questions for Dr. Jeffrey Wallace today.
I'm nervous because I don't know what you're asking. I don't know what you're
It might not be as controversial as you think. But
okay.
All right, number one.
All right.
If you can only eat one food for the rest of your life, what are you eating?
Oh, hands down, a mighty meaty pizza.
Ooh.
I am a pizza lover.
Okay.
And so meat lovers with, I would say, no ham, substitute ham for onions and banana peppers.
Okay.
And so
man, I've heard people. Pizza's a great answer.
Yeah.
I've heard people commit to pizza as a category. Like I'm gonna eat pizza for the rest of my life because you got a lot of things you can do.
Yeah, you can go deep dish. You can go.
You committed to one single pizza.
Well, okay, all right. I do like the barbecue chicken too.
Okay, all right.
But yeah, man. I'm a thin crust, New York style, Chicago style, deep dish. Like I love. Pizza, and so if I had another, it'd be buffalo wings.
Okay,
it's
yeah, we're branching out.
Yeah.
Okay, my second question.
Yes, sir.
The people who are closest to you, they know this about me. Like it could be a funny thing, a serious thing, or but like,
oh my gosh,
people who are closest to you know. Like the people who are closest to me know that I absolutely hate cilantro with every fiber of my being.
Are you serious?
I can't do it.
All right. Okay. All right. This is gonna be bad. This is gonna be bad because I'm gonna give our Chasing Elephants audience one. The people who are close to me know that I almost got kicked out of daycare when I was baby because I was a crier. And so I was, I'm a mama's boy, I love my mama. And I used to cry. And so my dad used to get frustrated because they would call, my mom would get frustrated. And my aunts and uncles, they all kind of lived around us. And so I was teased growing up, everybody thought I was going to be like this crybaby and stuff. But I did, man. I almost like the daycare, and they called my mom several times. It's like, hey,
can't do it anymore.
Yeah, if he doesn't stop crying, we're going to have to ask you guys to take him somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so my whole family and then people who, because they know that I was, it was bad.
Yeah. Well, you toughened up. Yeah,
I did.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I love that. Thank you. I've not shared that. That's a very, very.
I feel like I know you on a new level.
Yeah. You know what's so sad about this, Ryan, is I know people like Brian and Nikki in particular from our team. This is going to come up in staff meeting again. And so, but you know what? You're welcome. Guys, you guys are welcome and stuff. Well, man, hey, thank you, bro, for these last couple weeks. Phenomenal, man, and so grateful for your insight and your wisdom. I think the conversation has been so rich. What Britt and we love about conversations like these is we get an opportunity to, really speak to the practitioners and the leaders and the educators, like right down the street of where they are. And so we've been having this conversation about Youth Pastor Summit, the 4 questions that we're asking. We've already dealt with the spiritual formation, who we're becoming. The ethics question of what should we be thinking? What should we think? We've talked about the mission, God's mission, like what story is God telling, And so this one, we're going to, I think it's appropriate that we're ending, on leadership, you know, and because of the fact that, you know, we are student
You're kind
leadership.
of a leadership organization. Yeah. It's kind of
Yes,
what you
kind
do.
of what we do, you know, and so, but really asking the question, Ryan, why and how do we influence, and just thinking about, you know, this whole idea of being a leader who's an influencer. Jesus talks in Matthew 5:13-16 about being salt and light. You know, he's like, you know, he says, obviously, you know, you're the salt of the earth, you know, and you're also the light of the world. And he talks about not losing the salt, not losing its saltiness, you know, and the whole purpose of that, of the imagery, is like the minerals of salt, you know, represent purity, vitality, you know, and it represents our commitment as leaders to make sure that we're not compromising our character, our integrity, or allowing carnality to infiltrate our spirituality. Because when carnality infiltrates the spirituality, then that's when Jesus said, you know, what good is salt, you know, if it loses saltiness, you know, you got to throw it out and be trampled under feet. And so, but then also, so that's who we should be. Leaders who aren't compromising or rationalizing. But then the action item is, he says, then we ought to be the light of the world, you know, and that not to point our lights to ourselves, but to be a city situated on a hill, so that we're pointing people to Jesus. And so we're talking about this idea as leaders. And I think, you know, okay, we can be on say, oh, that's taboo. As leaders, we're influencers. Okay, we hear that. But I think what we're saying for the sake of this conversation is it's so much deeper than that. And you as a leader and an influencer yourself, you know, you understand this reality that leadership is both verbal and nonverbal. It's not always about what you say that impacts your influence, but it's how you live in front of people.
That's right.
It's not about the title of who you are, you know, as a pastor, as an author, you know, as a national communicator. It's that those titles, that's those titles, but that really doesn't necessarily mean that you're leveraging your leadership and your influence. And so this conversation, obviously, if you're coming to Youth Pastor Summit, we're going to talk to the leaders in the room. And we're going to ask the question, like, you know, why is leadership important? How should you influence? And what does that look like holistically? And so I love this topic, but I'll just throw it to you, man. Why do you think, obviously, you know, but why do you think this topic is so important? And what's your thoughts on the topic of leadership and this question of why and how should we influence?
I think it's a great question, and I think it's one that we all have to answer, right? How do I cultivate my influence for the glory of God, you know? And man, I think that leadership is a part of discipleship. Like at some point, if you're not leading, then you're not becoming all of what it means to be a disciple, right? So, you know, we'll kind of ask, we have this like 4 questions that we'll ask kids just to kind of gauge their spiritual health or like where they are in the journey. You know, or if a kid comes to you and they're like, man, I don't know about my relationship with the Lord. I'm not feeling, you know, we kind of walk through these questions. And the first one is like, are you spending time with Jesus daily? Like, it's like, if you tell me no, I know where we got to start, you know, it's like, you know, but if you're like, yeah, you know, I really am, you know, and all that, we'd go like, are you living out God's word publicly and privately? It's like, okay, you're learning, you're reading, but like, are you applying? Is it making a difference in your life? Like, are there any, like, are you one way here and a different way here? You know, it's like that integrity that you spoke about. It's like, we have one life. You know, are you giving of yourself? Like, are you giving of your time, talents, and treasures? It's like, you know, are you serving? Are you giving financially? All, you know, whatever, all the things. But the last one is like, are you leading others to do the same? You know, and it's like, that's great. And the idea is that's like, at some point, like, leadership is an essential component of discipleship. You know, those who spent the most time with Jesus were commissioned and deployed and sent out. And, you know, these are the very people that he's going like, you're salt of the earth, you're the light of the world, you know? And so I think leadership in the broad sense is really important because it is part of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And then, I think specifically for those who are leading, it just goes back to even some of what we've talked about in other episodes. It's like, why would we not do anything and everything we can to maximize what God has given us? And God has given us influence.
And we're called to influence, and we're not just called to inspire and motivate, but we're called to influence for the glory of God. We always ask that question in the dream session, like, what would you do for the glory of God if you knew you would not fail?
Love it.
And we're called to be influencers. Peter Northouse, scholar Peter Northouse would define leadership as one's ability to influence an individual, singular, or individuals, plural, to achieve a common goal. And then he would go on and say that influence is the central process to leadership. And I think that, you can look at this question through two different lenses. Obviously through a very secular lens of leadership, because we know leadership is a conversation that obviously is talked about in the marketplace. But what we're talking about, that especially at Youth Pastor Summit, we're talking about this through obviously a theological standpoint, through the lens of Christian leadership. What does it mean to be a fully devoted follower of Jesus, a person who's living as a citizen of heaven, who's saying, man, I am going to leverage my influence for the glory of God. Amen. And I think that, I want to kind of start, Ryan, if you will, like in a different direction of talking about personal leadership. And the reason why is because, sadly, we're living in an age where there are a lot of, double agent leaders. I don't know. Wow. I'm trying to be kind, and saying that. But unfortunately, seriously, we've seen a lot of moral failure, a lot of leaders who are just falling away from the faith for a lot of different reasons. Brian, what I love about Brian is like kind of like the SLU TMZ. Like he
keeps you up to date.
Keeps you up to date on stuff. And so he'll like, hey, did you know this youth pastor's going through this or this? And I'm like, oh my gosh, no. And so I think the reason why I say that, Ryan, is because when we talk about this idea of the why and how, I think we need to start with a commitment of our private leadership.
That's right.
Because I think that what we do in our private life is far more important than what we do publicly.
That's right.
And I think that if we are faithful in our private life, then the Lord will bless us and we'll be very fruitful in our public ministry life and leadership. And so what would you say to this idea that first, as we're talking about influencing others, just speak to the importance of us making sure that we are influencing ourselves for the glory of God. Like we are committed to leading ourselves well. I bet that's probably a better way to ask that.
Yeah, it's so good. Like, and we've all heard it's some version of this said, right? Like you can't lead yourself. You can't lead
others.
And I think that's absolutely true. Unfortunately, and I've done this, unfortunately when you're leading others, there seems to be a lot of excuses around why you might not be leading yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of what I've had to wrestle with personally is like, you can actually be a great leader of others and be a terrible leader of yourself.
Wow,
and so in
good.
one sense, that's true, right? Like you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others.
That's good.
Actually, the more dangerous thing is you can.
Wow.
You can lead others without being a great leading yourself well.
Wow.
And actually, I think that's where we get into trouble, right? And so
Great
we make
point.
statements like that
Great
are like,
point.
they're maybe very motivating.
Yeah.
But I actually think the more dangerous thing is like leading others without leading yourself. And that's where we see the fallout. So I think, that is one of the reasons this is really important, because at the end of the day, the stakes are really high. They're really, really high. And every time a leader crosses a line or does something to, compromise their own integrity, there's fallout from that.
Yeah, man.
One, there's people's lives that are clearly impacted.
Yeah.
There's families that are deeply impacted.
Yeah.
There's the reputation of the church and the reputation of Christ. And so I just think like, you know, I think of the scripture where it's like, none of you should desire to be teachers, you know? Like, and what's it implying? It's like there's a high call on the life of a leader. And so when we talk about this, about self-leadership and about starting with us first, I'm just reminded of just the high price if we don't get this right, what that kind of fallout looks like. And so I think we're kind of in desperate need of some like men and women of integrity. And it doesn't mean that we won't make mistakes, because we all make them, you know. But Lord, protect us from ourselves. Has kind of been my prayer lately.
Yeah, and from a practical standpoint, you know, I would always say, you know, I would much rather deal with an ugly truth than a beautiful lie, you know, and that, you know, I think to your point of leading yourself well, I think it starts with a willingness to say, man, I just gotta be honest with myself.
Yeah.
Here are my struggles, you know, and you know, because you gotta admit it first to yourself and to the Lord, who already knows. And then after you admit it to yourself and the Lord, who already knows, then I think right after you need to go and confess that and admit that to somebody else, so that you can have someone who is holding you accountable. I think the danger when you talk about, you know, that form of self-leadership, when we stay in isolation, and we trust ourselves that much, and we believe that we can work it out ourselves. You know, and I think that's the danger, because I don't trust myself like that. I don't trust myself to know that I can work it out by myself. I've tried it. I've tried it in my life, where I've tried, like, you know what, I'm gonna fix this. I got it. I know this is bad. I'm gonna fix it. And there's something about a system of accountability that helps keep me committed to the journey of healing and restoration and healthy self-leadership. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely right.
I when I know that, man, Ryan's going to ask me some questions.
And it's probably a good place to say, like, we've tried hard to like cultivate those relationships in our lives, and give it, like, you have permission in my life to,
same,
like,
and vice versa.
You see that in me. Not only do you have permission to call it out in me, you're responsible to call it out in me, because what's at stake is so significant. You know, like, so I think you're spot on. I think, you know, one, we obviously can't handle those things ourselves, you know, but accountability is only as valuable as you are honest, you know. And so
pause. Listen, say that again. I think that is so important, because that is true. That is true.
Like you can, accountability is only as you know, valuable as you are honest. And it's like I can actually go like, hey, Jeff, like, make sure that you ask me. Like, we can have the system and the conversations and all that, but like, at the end of the day, like, it's only as valuable as I am honest. So, you know, like,
so good.
So a way that I've like encouraged people before is like, find some people you can't lie to, you know, like, you know, like I remember when I was in high school, one of my buddies, and actually, like, probably the first person in my life I can remember who was like fully committed to following the Lord. Like, he was a legit follower of Jesus. And, you know, I remember him talking to me about a struggle with pornography, and how he overcame it, you know. And he was like, he did two things that seemed extreme. You know, but he's like, I took the door off of my bedroom.
Wow.
Because I'm like, I recognize he's
going,
I recognize, like, man, there's only one time and place where this struggle comes to the forefront. It's like, it's behind closed door. So get rid of the closed door, you know? And,
I love that.
And he was like, you know, he had accountability software, like really all of us should have and do have. And he's like, I put my mom as my accountability like, she's going to get the email when I mess up, you know, because it was like, man, find somebody you can't lie to, you know? And so that's where you know, those, as a high school student, it was super inspirational to me to see somebody like, man, I'm that committed to my private life. I'm that committed to like overcoming this struggle, that, yeah, I'm going to put in some sort of extreme, what seems extreme forms of accountability.
Yeah.
But like, man, he did overcome
that
struggle because of some of those steps. So that's where I would go, like, man, find some people you can't lie to, give people permission, make sure they have the responsibility, but you've got to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's where often, obviously, we fall short.
Yeah, no, that's good. I want to state here one more question or conversation around the personal, then we'll talk about some practical outside, kind of influence. But to that point, I think it's important for those of us who also are married, that our spouses also equally have access to everything.
Yeah,
my wife, she has access to all of my email, 100%. Passwords, all the stuff. Like, just know this: you ain't DMing me on social media without my wife. I mean, she can see it. Like you're DMing me and my wife. And I think that it is important that as leaders who are wanting to be committed even in our marriages, that we I love that illustration of taking the door off of the hinges there. Like, there is like, hey, there is no way that I'm going to be private. Like, I'm removing the system of privacy in our life, especially in the areas where we know that we're struggling.
100%.
Like, here's the truth. Ryan and I aren't saying that, as Christian leaders, we got to be perfect. And once you become a follower of Jesus, like, you don't have any struggles or anything like that. That's no, right. What we're saying is like, hey, because, you've said it before, like, because the cost, we got to count the cost, is so great, that we want to make sure that we're above reproach and that we're putting ourselves in such a system of exposure, like that. I want to be exposed, and so for my wife, I am the person that I need double layers. I need the layer, obviously, of my wife, of accountability. But then I also need the layer of friendships,
right.
Because there's some things as a man that I struggle with or I'm dealing with, that I need a brother, in Christ who I can go to and be like, hey, man, my wife and I, we got some tension points here, and I can't talk to her about it. I mean, I need to, and I will. But right now, I need a friend, a brother in Christ, and vice versa if you are a female leader, and so I think that when we talk about leading ourselves, obviously the individual, there's a way to do it, but if you are in a marriage, you are married, you need to invite your spouse into this a sense of complete vulnerability. And I'm just a person. People can say, hey, I ain't doing that, Jeff. Well, your business between you and the Lord and your spouse. But I'm a person, like, there is no secrets with me and my wife.
No,
Only time that my wife and I will say, and she knows this, we welcome this secret. The only time there are secrets in our house is when I am hiding a gift that I have for her, even though she's texted me the picture of what she wants, and but if I'm hiding a gift, I'll kind of pull money out and say it's for something else, but it's for that, like, and then we and then then I'm confessing, hey, that money I pulled out there, that was for that, right. And I'm sorry I lied about that, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, what would you say, like, from a practical standpoint, for those of us who are married and this level of leading ourselves well and that vulnerability there?
Yeah, I think, it's easy to impress people from a distance. And actually the people who should be, like, most impressed with your life are the people who are closest to you.
So good. Good point.
I don't care.
Right.
What somebody, 3 relationships removed on Instagram thinks about me, but what my wife and kids think about me, so I think the people who have the front row seat of your life, ought to be the ones who are the most impressed. And I think, to your point, like, transparency is absolutely critical in all of those relationships, and especially with with your spouse, like obviously we've talked about this before, but like for me, I kind of have this statement that sort of helps me prioritize my life. And it's this like Christian husband, father, pastor, in that order always. Somebody said it.
Yeah.
And I don't remember years ago at this point who said it, but Christian husband, father, pastor, in that order always. And so again, like outside of my relationship with Jesus, the most important relationship for me to cultivate is the relationship with my spouse. And if I get that out of sync or out of order or out of priority, that's when the house of cards begins to tumble.
Yep, absolutely.
So yeah, I think like, man, the more transparent I can be about all of my struggles, the more people who have eyes on my life, the better. Better off I'll be, because to your point, I know my weakness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's important. And we talk about the leadership. I think it's important, we would be, I think it's important. I should say it this way. I think it's important to start there with the personal leadership first before we start talking about, like key leadership insights. Like we can give some nuggets and all this stuff. But the reason why I wanted to go there, so thank you for that, brother, is because, you talked about, I resonated with that statement where you're like, hey, we actually can lead others well and not be leading ourselves well. And so when you said that, I was like, you know what? You're right. And let's pause for a moment before we get into some practical leadership nuggets and why you need to come to YPS and all that stuff, but just to focus on that. And so let's shift gears a little bit, Ryan, and like, what would you say are some key leadership insights that you would share with leaders on how to maximize, we've talked about personal leadership, but you can go deeper in that, but just to maximize their leadership and their influence, some personal insights that you've either you practice yourself, or you share with your team, or if you're leading a conference or whatever, just some maybe some practical nuggets on how to maximize your leadership.
Yeah, you mentioned a little while ago just the like faithfulness and fruitfulness, and I think a lot of times we think that fruitfulness is like the end goal, like we're faithful so that we can be fruitful. I think that maybe I'm just speaking for me, like that's a trap that I've fallen into before, is like that faithfulness is almost like a means to an end. And that fruitfulness is like what we're going after. And I think that where I've had to grow as a leader is like, that is so wrong. It's backwards, actually faithfulness is the goal in of itself. Like that is the end. Is like faithfulness, and that fruitfulness is a byproduct, because we've all seen things that are fruitful. But then eventually you see that like the faithfulness that you would assume is behind the fruitfulness is not actually there. And so I think what one way that I've had to reshape my thinking is just to go, man, impact, fruitfulness, changing the world, whatever you want to, like that's not the goal. Actually faithfulness is the goal. And I remember a handful of years ago, there was a dad who came into my office, and we were meeting just about what was going on in the life of his son. And, it was a really hard conversation because his son had like kind of was straying from the Lord and was making some decisions that was like breaking this father's heart, you know? And so we just came to talk and pray and just ask God to move in the life of his son. And I remember I started when we came to our time of prayer. I remember praying for this young man and praying that, God was going to use this story for influence and impact, and God was going to turn it around. He was going to be this world changer. Not all fine. And then I remember as soon as I was done, through a lot of tears, this like broken hearted dad was just like, Lord, just help him to be faithful. And I felt like really convicted in the moment that like, man, I just made that mistake. I made it about like fruitfulness and impact and change and all. And like at the end of the day, like what matters more than anything else?
Wow.
Man, what matters is that this young man would be faithful to the
Yeah.
things of God. And I don't know. That was like a
That's so
moment,
good.
random moment that
Yeah.
like totally marked me. And just kind of going like, I've missed it.
Yeah.
I really missed it. And not that what I prayed wasn't good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to what we're talking about, I'm just going like, man, fruitfulness is not the goal. Faithfulness is the goal. And sometimes fruitfulness is a byproduct of faithfulness.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But even if it's not,
Yeah.
it's like, you know, so if all we ever do is like just be faithful to what the Lord's called us to do, faithful in our relationships, you know, faithful with Him and with the people who are closest to it, like if that's just it, if you never lead the big ministry or the big event or preach at the big conference, like the Lord is not impressed with any of that. Right? Like He may or may not open up those opportunities, but again, the goal is faithfulness.
Yeah, and to that, I would say a practical insight is, you know, don't focus, and take us back to our spiritual discipline. Don't focus on the platform you're on first. Yeah. Focus on the relationship you've cultivated with the Lord. And when you're to your point of the faithfulness, when you're faithful over the, you know, really kind of focusing on that relationship with the Lord, then He will platform you accordingly. And then I would say also to that, Ryan, I think it's important that as leaders, we steward the platform or leadership context that we have. Yeah. And that we would, and the B part of that is that in doing that we would kill the spirit of compromise. So often what happens is, man, as leaders, you know, you have like you'll come to YPS and you're in a breakout with you and let's say you have some of your team there from Christ Fellowship that are there, and I've been guilty of this, so I'm speaking from experience early on in ministry. You sitting there and you don't have the ministry size of a Christ Fellowship, and now what happens is that a couple things. One, there's we're on spirits of jealousy. 2, spirit of comparison. 3, spirit of envy. Yeah. You know, a little jealousy that kind of seeps in, and then you begin to diminish the influence that you have in your context because you are focusing on the anointing and calling of someone else. You know, but when you steward and really going back to sound like a broken record, but to the faithfulness of the ministry that God has, if you know, God can't bless you with more until you are very faithful with what you have in the small things. And I think we have to be careful as leaders if we really want to maximize our influence to be grateful in all things, not in just some things. You know?
Jeff, I think this is so important, especially where we are culturally, what we see in the church. And, you know, to your point, we equate, like when you hear that, man, you got to be faithful in the small things for you to be entrusted with more. I think our mistake sometimes is what that means is, the way that I internalize that is, if I'm faithful with the small platform, the Lord will give me a big platform.
One. That's not what we're saying. Right.
No, that's like not it. Because if you are not faithful, if you can't be faithful, you don't have the character or the integrity or with the smaller platform. Then actually a bigger one is not a blessing.
Yes.
Right? Like, because, you know, many people have talked about kind of, you know, coming to a place where your character can't sustain, you know, the opportunity or the influence or the limelight that you've been given, right? So it's like, we can't equate like bigger platforms and more influence with like, you know what I mean? That means, they must have been faithful with a little. That's true. Because when you can't be faithful with a little, that bigger thing is actually the thing that's going to kill you, and it's not a blessing. And so we need to be careful about like mixing those things up, if that makes sense.
So good. And I think especially in the culture in which we live in right now, as far as what we see through social media and the digital platforms, you're able to see things. And what people don't realize is the technology of filters and the way that you can craft things can also create a false narrative of success.
Yeah.
You know, that because I know, I'm just being honest, there are some people that I've seen on social media exclusively. And I think that their church or ministry is this. And then I actually get to go because I've only seen it through social media. And you know, and then I go there and it's like, oh, you peek behind the curtains and it's like you just see the wizard just kind of, you know, from the Wizard of Oz, just kind of just one person doing all these things. And so I think we have to be careful not to allow the way that the culture in which we live in, because we talked about this a little bit when we did the episode about how students have access to so much. Man, we began to think, man, this is successful. And then we hunger and thirst after unrighteousness, or we hunger and thirst after things that, you know, are not healthy and God honoring. And then what we do is we kind of shun aside those students that the Lord has placed in our lives to shepherd and to steward and care for and to help, you know, cultivate their faith and all that stuff, because we're looking in it, we're enamored with the shiny new toy, you know, and what got the music to it. I mean, every reel now, I mean, and you know, obviously there's, for marketing, we do that. You know, you want the reel to have the great music and the voices and, you know, and all of that and stuff. But when it comes to our own ministry leadership, we have to be super careful not to give into that and equate this as success at the expense of the discipleship of the students that the Lord has entrusted us with.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was listening to John Maxwell recently, and he was talking about how, you know, there's a lot of people who are like, how do I do what you do? I want to do what you do. And he's like, yeah, but you don't want to do what I did. You know, it's like we kind of, we want the platform, we want the influence, we want the, but you know, he's kind of going, you don't really want to put in the work that it took to get here. And so, even on a smaller scale, I think about, like, you know, the people, as an example, in our ministry who, like, want to preach or want the you know, I'm like, gosh, they're kind of the last person I want to put up there. You know, maybe that's wrong. It's like, I want people to understand their gifting, and I want them to be able to express what God has called them to. But you know the difference between, like, oh man, when, you know, like, I've jokingly in the past said, like, man, if an intern is going to be like, when do I get to preach? I'm like, you don't.
Never. right, yeah.
You know, like, and I mean that kind of in jest, but what I do think is true is, like, man, I think most of the leaders that I know that are kind of the most anointed in those areas are usually, like, to borrow a C.S. Lewis phrase, like, the most reluctant converts. You know, it's like I didn't want to, but I kind of, you know, like, you recorded an episode with Pastor Todd, you know, from our church a couple weeks back, and he was talking about, like, man, when I got thrown in to lead our whole church, he's like, I didn't want to do that. I wasn't sure, you know, and it's like, I would much rather kind of have that posture. It's like the people who aren't looking for opportunities that the Lord usually, you know, it's like, I think about David marching out into the, like, he wasn't a soldier. He was like delivering pizza, you know, like this is like Grubhub, you know, and David's out there in the middle of the battlefield and he's like the only one who's like, well, how dare that giant defile my God, you know, and it's like, he wasn't looking for that opportunity, but the Lord put him in that moment, you know? So I think that kind of speaks to, like, man, sometimes we have the wrong vision of what it means to be successful in leadership. Right?
And then the last thing I would say to that is be comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's so important. You know, I am such a big fan of communicators like yourself and Brent and others, man. And, you know, and I think, you know, sometimes we get caught into the trap of trying to preach like someone else.
That's right.
Teach like someone else, lead worship like someone else, you know, and you know, and I think we have to be comfortable in our own skin.
So true.
And appreciate the customized anointing that's on our own lives.
Yeah.
And I think that is so that's important, right? Because, no one can preach like you but you, because that's the anointing that God has on your life. And no one, can teach and lead. Like, man, Brent is, just a historian. Like he can deep dive some of the most incredible topics, and he has such a gifted way of really kind of bringing it to light and sharing and just historical facts. He loves that. He is, in my opinion, a historian and a theologian, Yes. and I've learned so much from him.
Oh my gosh, one of the best communicators I've ever heard.
Yeah. And so, but that's not me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's not, I'm not, there's only one Brent Crow.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to be careful, especially, Ryan, when we're on the team or we serve with people who have different giftings that we may appreciate or whatever, but being comfortable as leaders in our own skin, and however the Lord has gifted you. Man.
Yeah, I heard somebody say one time, God can't bless who you pretend to be. And
that's good.
I mean, it's true, like in every area.
Yeah.
And that, when I'm thinking about preaching and all that, being, kind of borrowing somebody else's voice, I think that's true. But also, even in your, we're talking about life and your private life and leadership. It's like, God can't bless who you pretend to be. You know? So I think that's true. And I would say, like, I know this wasn't really your question.
That's good.
I would say, like, one of my own personal struggles in leadership has been exactly what you just hit on, is like, how can I walk in a confidence in who God has called me to be, and not be this voice or that voice, and I think that, going on that journey and learning to be comfortable and confident in my own skin and in my own gifting, and in my own weaknesses, all the things, I think that's where the Lord has really kind of blessed some of the ministry that I've gotten to be a part of, is just really walking that out, and I think, like, practically when you, like, first start preaching a lot, or like you're listening to everybody.
Absolutely. Bro, like, yes.
You're there's not much that sounds original. So,
right.
So it takes time to find your voice. This is true not just in preaching, but in leadership. It takes, you kind of take all of that in, and you're figuring it out.
Yeah.
You're learning how God's wired you, but I think that being able to walk in that like combination of confidence and humility is like the place where the anointing really rests, So I think about like Moses, right? So Bible says of Moses, like most humble man, to ever live. I assume second to Jesus, right? But that he had this great quality and characteristic of humility. But when you go to the moment where Moses is called, he's like, Lord, you got the wrong guy. Right? That's not humility. That's insecurity. Like when the Lord first calls him,
and there's a difference.
There's a massive difference between humility and insecurity, And so he starts in this place of insecurity. The Lord's like, I am who I am, kind of gives him all the thing, And then we see Moses walk in this like kind of confident humility, And like, if you get kind of towards the end of the story, like there's a moment, where Moses ultimately isn't allowed to enter the promised land. Why? Because God gave him the instruction of like how to call water forth from the rock, but he took it in his own hand. Like, so there was, Moses is kind of this like archetype of like literally like insecurity to like arrogance.
Right.
He ultimately doesn't enter the promised land because he like did it in his own strength, right? And so what that speaks to me about is like, we've kind of set up humility and confidence as opposites. They're not.
Yeah.
The opposite of humility is arrogance.
Yeah.
In a way, the opposite of confidence is insecurity.
Yeah.
But they're actually like, if you think about the most like anointed leaders, there is this beautiful combination of like confidence and humility.
Yeah.
Like They know who they are. They know who God's called them to be. They're unapologetic about their leadership and their influence, and yet they're like, it is not me. It is all of the Lord.
Yeah,
like,
man.
So I think that combination is like, at least for me, it's been a helpful picture of like, that's the kind of leader I want to be, and the people that I've been most impacted by, I think, have figured out how to walk in that confident humility.
Yeah, man. No, that's so good. And I think all of these things, and more, we're going to talk about at YPS. And so, but I think that's so good, Ryan. And I think that's probably, I would suggest that what you talked about, just there, knowing the difference, there is so important for leadership, period, across the board, like regardless of phase and stage, context, position, just really being able to walk in confidence and total humility, pushing against the arrogance and the pride. All of those things are essential in maximizing your leadership influence.
100%. No one wants to follow an insecure leader.
Nope.
No one wants to follow an arrogant leader.
Nope. Right.
We know that, confidence, like in yourself, creates confidence in your leadership.
Yeah.
Like people want to follow a confident leader.
Yeah.
But people want to follow a humble leader.
Yeah.
So I think just, kind of knowing those things and having a picture of the type of leader that you want to become, because there are consequences when we kind of, like if Moses had remained insecure, he would have missed out on everything that God did in the wilderness, everything that God did through him, how God used his life, the miracle of the Red Sea, all the things, right? So you can't stay there, but he did miss out on what God could have done,
right? Because
there was this moment of arrogance. And so I think just kind of trying to fight to remain in that posture of confident humility. And so there are a lot of reasons the conversation about leadership is important. I think we've hit on a couple big ones. It's like, man, what's at stake? Fruitfulness is not the goal. Faithfulness is the goal. That's why this is important, but also like we will miss out on something that God could or do through us, desires to do through us, if we don't figure out how to be the very best leader that God
man, it's so good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me just say, we're going to put a pin right there, because if we give you more, you won't go to Youth Pastor Summit. You'll just kind of just keep playing this podcast over and over, because we can even talk about the importance of being able to articulate clearly vision, mission, values, and all that stuff, and all those things. But I think at the end of it, the personal leadership commitment to me is the most important, because all the other things that are practical, that are contextual and all that stuff based on what you're doing, next gen, high school, middle school. There's so many things that we can, really kind of get down the weeds. But I think it's important for this conversation, when we talk about the importance of influence, is that we recognize we already talked about in the beginning, Matthew 5:13-16, being salt and light, and understanding that if we're called to be salt, that means we're not going to compromise our character and our integrity for anything. We talked about that leadership is not about positional. It's not about titles and position. It's about your commitment to be a godly influencer. We talked about, the importance of, putting in certain safeguards, in your life, because all of these things to me are priority. More so than the actual thing of really maximizing your role in a local church, a Christian school, a nonprofit, or whatever. Because if you're not doing these things that we just talked about, your effectiveness and leadership will be short-lived.
That's right.
Or, to your point earlier, you'll kind of be a fraud, because you're leading others, but you're not leading yourself. And so
and your leadership will be short-lived.
Right, exactly. Right. It is. Man, Ryan, bro, thank you so much. This has been so good.
Been a lot of fun.
So any parting words for the Chasing Elephants
I hope
group?
To see you at Youth Pastor Summit. Can't wait to be in the room together. It's not just about the value that we can add to you. we need you in the room because you will add so much value just by being
Well
there.
said.
We need each other, and so hope you'll come be a part of it. We need you as much as you need us.
Yeah, so good.
I'd love to be a part of it because we want to learn from you. We want to connect with you. We want to hear about what God's doing in your ministry. Again, like to what we've talked about in other episodes. What's the story that God is telling? How do we join Him in it? I think we're better if you're in the room.
So well said. And we can't wait to hang out with you. So make sure, if you get a chance to see myself or Ryan, please make sure you come up and say hello to us. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to complete our YPS 4 questions
mini-series.
Our mini-series, yes. And as Ryan's already said, man, we hope to see you. If you have not registered, make sure you go to our website, slulead.com, and you can just click on the YPS icon there, find the city that you want to attend and register, and we cannot wait to see you. We can't wait to connect with you. And so until next time, God bless you, and make sure that you're very intentional about being the best version of yourself every day of your life. We'll see you. Peace.